rare move tonight, just 10 days after leaving office. Escorting then-President-elect Donald Trump to the Capitol, tonight former President Obama weighing in. And so was the key ally who was just standing beside President Trump, British Prime Minister Theresa May, saying about this ban, "We do not agree." Here's ABC senior White House correspondent Cecilia Vega tonight.
Just 10 days after President Obama left that letter in the Oval Office for his successor, tonight he is offering a different message, saying through a spokesman, citizens exercising their constitutional right to assemble is exactly what we expect to see when American values are at stake. And he's also going where few past presidents go, delivering a not-so-subtle jab at the new president and his immigration crackdown. President Obama saying he fundamentally disagrees with the notion of discriminating against individuals because of their faith or religion. Those protests spreading from Canada to the UK. Signs saying welcome Muslims, ban Trump. And now some of America's closest allies not holding back. Just home from that White House visit when just 72 hours ago, Britain's Prime Minister Theresa May reaffirmed the UK's special relationship with the US. She's now mincing no words. We do not agree with this kind of approach, and it is not one we will be taking. In Iraq, the parliament approving a reciprocity measure that recommends banning Americans from entering the country. And Canada's Justin Trudeau taking to Twitter saying, to those fleeing persecution, terror, and war, Canadians will welcome you regardless of your faith. Diversity is our strength. Welcome to Canada.
I was denied.
But it was a big problem for Fuad Sharif and his family. He received immigrant visas after risking his life in Iraq working as a translator with the U.S. government. But they were pulled off their flight in Cairo. Tonight, they are back in Iraq, staying with family members, and tell us they fear for their lives.
Each and everyone who has worked with American government or American troops, his life in danger.
And Cecilia Vega with us live from the White House, our senior White House correspondent. Congrats on the new official role now, Cecilia. And back to the story, there's a growing petition in the UK to stop a visit from President Trump.
It's at more than 1.5 million signatures and growing, David, and that means Parliament will now debate this push to stop President Trump from a state visit to the UK.
Cecilia Vega at the White House tonight. Cecilia, thank you. We asked our Brian Ross to go back to 9/11, to the Boston bombings, to San Bernardino, asking where did those terrorists come from? And if there's going to be a ban in this country, why weren't those countries included? Here's our chief investigative correspondent, Brian Ross.
President Trump's ban somehow misses the very countries that have produced the terrorists responsible for the deadliest U.S. attacks. None of those killers came from any of the 7 countries on his list: Libya, Sudan, Syria, Iraq, Iran, Yemen, and Somalia. The 9/11 hijackers came from Saudi Arabia, Egypt, Lebanon, and the United Arab Emirates, none of them on the list. The wife in the San Bernardino terror couple came from Pakistan, not on the list. The husband, American-born. The Boston bombing brothers came from the Russian Republic of Dagestan, also not on the list. David Muir asked the president about the missing countries last week.
Let me ask you about some of the countries that won't be on the list. Afghanistan, Pakistan, Saudi Arabia.
You're going to see. You're going to see. We're going to have extreme vetting in all cases. And I mean extreme. And we're not letting people in if we think there's even a little chance of some problem.
The White House today said other countries could be added if necessary.
It's a 90-day review period. And if you've got other countries, please let us know.
Refugees from Somalia, which is on the list, were involved in 2 terror attacks last year at a Minnesota mall and at Ohio State University, but in each case, only the attacker died. The president's supporters also point to how the Obama administration drastically curtailed the flow of refugees from Iraq for 6 months in 2011. That came after the FBI discovered 2 Iraqi refugees connected to al-Qaeda had made it into the U.S. and were plotting attacks from their new home in Kentucky.
And Brian Ross is right here with us tonight. And Brian, back to that question we asked the president just last week. Why were countries like Saudi Arabia, Afghanistan, and Pakistan not included on this ban?
Well, David, there's still been no cogent answer from the White House, but we do know the military believes the 7 countries on the list are among the places ISIS fighters fleeing the battlefield may try to hide. And as the press secretary said, if you know more, let us know.
We are also learning more tonight about the terror north of the border. The attack targeting Muslims inside a mosque, killing 6 worshipers, injuring 8 others. Tonight, a suspect just charged as we learn now more about the motive. ABC's Gio Benitez in Quebec City tonight.
The shots rang out during the sacred evening prayers at the Quebec Islamic Cultural Center with 50 worshipers inside. One witness telling ABC News he heard someone shouting.
And then they opened shots. 2 people standing next to me praying were killed.
6 were killed, more than a dozen injured, 5 critically. Police arresting this man, 27-year-old Alexander Bissonnette, a student at a nearby university. Another man detained near the scene, later determined to be a witness and not a suspect. The timing hard to ignore. The attack after President Trump's immigration crackdown. The attack sending shockwaves through the community. The mosque's vice president breaking down in tears during a press conference with officials.
This was a group of innocents targeted for practicing their faith. Make no mistake, this was a terrorist attack.
The mosque in Quebec has been targeted before. Just this past summer, a pig's head was left on its doorstep during the holy month of Ramadan. President Donald Trump offering condolences to Prime Minister Trudeau, who had this message for the attacker.
The people who commit these acts mean to test our resolve and weaken our values. We will not close our minds. We will open our hearts.
And David, tonight here in Quebec, we're learning more about that alleged shooter. A former classmate describes him as anti-immigrant. Bissonnette now faces 6 counts of first-degree murder, 5 counts of attempted murder, and police believe he was a lone wolf.
At this moment, the Attorney General is Sally Yates. She's the acting Attorney General. She was appointed by Barack Obama, and she has just instructed Justice Department lawyers not to defend the executive order that was issued by President Trump last Friday dealing with immigration and refugees. She has just told her lawyers, essentially, that this is a law, an executive order that she doesn't believe is legally defensible by the Justice Department. Now, this has the effect of basically grounding this executive order, at least for the next few days that Sally Yates is in office as the acting Attorney General. As you know, Jeff Sessions is the nominee by President Trump, and he's awaiting confirmation by the Senate. I'll read you a part of an order she issued to her lawyers today, which says, "My responsibility is to ensure that the position of the Justice Department is not only legally defensible, but it is informed by our best view of what the law is after consideration of all the facts. In addition, I am responsible for ensuring that the positions we take in court remain consistent with this institution's solemn obligation to always seek justice and stand for what is right. At present, I am not convinced that the defense of the executive order is consistent with these responsibilities, nor am I convinced that the executive order is lawful." Wolf, this is a big deal for the Attorney General, the acting Attorney General, Sally Yates, to make this instruction to the Justice Department lawyers who really are responsible for defending executive orders that are issued by the president. Obviously, she's only Attorney General until Jeff Sessions comes in and takes office, but this will have an effect even beyond after she leaves office.
It is pretty extraordinary. There are 5 legal challenges that have now are before the courts in Virginia, New York, Massachusetts, Washington State, and California. And here you have the acting Attorney General of the United States saying, you know what, we're not going to challenge those. We're
not going to defend those challenges right now because we don't believe that this executive order, that the substance of this executive order is lawful. We don't know what the reaction of this White House is. If you have an Attorney General who says that I can't defend a law or an executive order from the president, typically the reaction is that the president fires that Attorney General. That is what has happened in the past. We don't know what will happen now. This is an instruction that went to Justice Department lawyers just within the past hour.
In an extraordinary move, President Trump firing acting Attorney General Sally Yates. Her dismissal coming via hand-delivered letter, only hours after she stood in defiance of the president's travel ban. Yates writing in a letter she is not convinced the executive order is lawful, citing the solemn obligation of the Department of Justice to always seek justice and stand for what is right.
We had a Monday night massacre. Sally Yates, a person of great integrity who follows the law, was fired.
The White House attacking the career prosecutor, claiming Yates betrayed the Department of Justice and is weak on borders after she instructed the Justice Department not to defend the president's executive order on immigration and refugees. Immediately following the swearing in of new acting Attorney General Dana Bente, Yates' replacement rescinding her guidance right away, directing the Department of Justice to, quote, defend the lawful orders of our president.
I want to make sure I have the law and the facts.
Appointed by President Obama in 2015, Yates garnering major bipartisan support. Senator Jeff Sessions, who's currently awaiting confirmation as Attorney General, seen here asking her if she'd bend to political pressure from then President Obama.
If the views the president wants to execute are unlawful, should the Attorney General or the Deputy Attorney General say no?
Senator, I believe that the Attorney General or the Deputy Attorney General has an obligation to follow the law and the Constitution and to give their independent legal advice to the President.
In yet another swift move Monday night, President Trump naming Thomas Homan as the new acting director of U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement, demoting Dan Ragsdale to his previous position of deputy director.
The Muslim ban has got to go!
Meantime, the president's travel ban met with growing outrage in Washington.
Your executive order was too broad, you didn't vet it.
And across the country.
Refugees are welcome here!
Only 10 days after leaving office, former President Obama weighing in. A spokesman saying the protests are exactly what we expect to see when American values are at stake. Trump's White House slamming any opposition, telling dissenting State Department officials to quit their posts if they disagree with the policy.
I think that they should either get with the program or they can go.
All this as President Trump moves up his Supreme Court nomination announcement by 2 days, scheduling a primetime address tonight.
And I think you will be very impressed with this person.
We already have a statement from the new acting Attorney General, it reads in part, based upon the Office of Legal Counsel's analysis, which found the executive order both lawful on its face and properly drafted, I hereby rescind former acting Attorney General Sally Yates' January 30 guidance and direct the men and women of the Department of Justice to do our sworn duty and to defend the lawful orders of our president. Mark Geragos, how can one Attorney General find one legal ruling to be valid and constitutional and another one finds it to be completely the opposite?
Because he did exactly what I hate to get into the weeds here, but all he said is the Office of Legal Counsel found it to be facially constitutional. That means the law as written is constitutional. She specifically said in her message to the employees, it's not constitutional as applied. That's what the judges found. And I know that people want to say, well, they're Obama appointees. I'll reiterate it. The acting Attorney General is also an Obama appointee, and his claim to fame is he convicted the Virginia governor, Bob McDonnell, and that was then reversed by the U.S. Supreme Court. So he has been spectacularly wrong in his legal analysis within the last 1 year.
We are here tonight because this country is in crisis. We are here tonight because it is a constitutional crisis, because it is a moral crisis. We are here tonight to stand up and ask the rest of the United States Senate to overturn Donald Trump's executive order. We have that power. All we need is the courage to stand up and do what is right. This is why we came to the United States Senate, to stand up and do what is right. I call on the rest of the Senate to overturn Donald Trump's illegal, unconstitutional, and immoral executive order.
No fear!
As thousands across the country protest President Trump's travel ban on 7 Muslim-majority nations, here outside Atlanta, his supporters are cheering him on.
I'm glad to see our president taking the actions that he needs to take to provide the highest degree of security for the American citizenry that he possibly can.
Jay Lin came to America decades ago. He, too, agrees with Trump and said something that the group expressed about the order.
It's temporary until we figure out a way of securely vetted the people who are coming to this country I think everyone wants to be safe.
They all feel in the aftermath of 9/11 and subsequent attacks in San Bernardino, Paris, and Nice, the world changed. And America's policies have to change as well.
I walked that same street in Nice where the truck ran over all those people. So I'm aware that we're just a few steps removed from terrible things that could happen. And I'm okay with a temporary stop so that we can reevaluate where we are.
Instead of blaming President Trump, they say blame the people who flew planes into buildings, turned a holiday party into a massacre, and mowed families down on a street. They do not hate Muslims, they stress, and resent those who say they do.
And I think the pushback ended up being like, no, I don't like you because you're Muslim. I don't like you because you're making me feel unsafe.
Lenny also agrees with the president, but he admits he grapples with the impact on refugees.
So that's what I struggle with morally, because is it the right thing to do? I don't know, but I believe this is a temporary thing, and making sure we're getting it right is okay.
Vinny immigrated from India 41 years ago. He's the only one in his family to vote for Trump, something they often ask him about.
How can you agree with our president that so many people are left on the airports? Now I'm saying, yeah, there is a human side of it, which I think, which we could have done differently. But the intent, I think the intent is right.
Bob says this is not about being fair to those immigrants who want to come to America, but about being fair to an entire nation of immigrants already here.
They've come here to create a society and a nation, and they want to be protected. And right now we have a threat, and we are at war, and we have to recognize that and do something about it.
I know you know about this happened during the Nixon administration. Similarly, I think the person stepped down, but this time, what do you think? Do you think that she needed to go?
There's a big difference, because the Saturday Night Massacre was really about firing the Attorney General when Nixon was the target of an investigation and was actively obstructing justice. I think the president is within his rights here to fire the Attorney General, that he has that ability, and it's not wise that he did. But what's really happened here is that the president and his presidency is in chaos. And it's apparent to all but his most serious defenders and those who are his greatest defenders and advocates. But for Republicans on Capitol Hill, who I'm talking to, who are doubting his abilities, doubting even his stability under pressure, this is an extraordinary series of events.
Sally Yates set out to be fired. I think she was wanting to be a holdover hero. It's the easiest thing in the world when you're a person from the other party to become a hero to all the people like me who are opposed to this policy. But in doing that, she, I think, clearly overstepped her bounds. She has no right to refuse to enforce the law because she disagrees with the policy.
Alan, let me ask you something.
Obligation
Can I ask you something,
was to
Alan?
resign. Yes.
Can I ask you something?
Yeah.
They were talking, what's the definition of competence, right? Fareed seems to think that it was an incompetent rollout. There seems to be agreement among Republicans and Democrats that it could have been rolled out better. Not that they necessarily agree with the bulk of the terms of this ban in some ways, but that it was not a professional rollout.
No doubt about that, but that's not the job of the Attorney General. She is the chief law enforcement officer of the United States. She has a client. Her client is the government of the United States. She has an obligation to enforce the law, even if she disagrees with the policy behind it, as long as it's constitutional and lawful.
We got it.
And she went well beyond
We got it, but I don't think that was the point you were making.
That's the fairy tale version of how Washington works. The reality is Washington is a political town. All I'm saying is if you want to get your stuff through, if you want to get through the administration, through Congress, through the American public, you have to have a strategy. You have to have backup plans. You have to expect political opposition. You have to expect that career holdovers from the former administration might block. None of this was taken into account, and they're surprised that they can't get anything through.
Congressman Amash, when you think about this executive order, to you, is this about politics more than it really is about security?
I think it is. I mean, when you look at the countries that are involved, you're missing some big ones. You're missing Saudi Arabia, Pakistan, several other countries where there have been terror threats in the past. Afghanistan.
Afghanistan's on the list. Yeah.
Yeah, and those aren't included on the list.
Can you just explain exactly what parts you take issue with? Because I know, first of all, the green card issue was something I saw you tweeting about. They've obviously rescinded that. But what else do you think is a problem with this? Because there are people who say, look, I feel safer. This makes me feel safer.
Well, I take issue with parts of the whole thing. So the green card issue is a big one. They haven't really rescinded it. They've only said that they'll let green card holders in on a case-by-case basis. So it's still part of the executive order, which goes to the root problem of the executive order. It was sloppy, too broad, and poorly executed. And so you have the green card issue, who are lawful permanent residents. Those are people who live among us. They're our neighbors. They serve in our armed forces. They pay taxes here. And they were harmed and not sure how it was going to affect them. And now they're going to still get some higher screening, which is pretty unusual for people who have been living among us and live their lives here.
Do you think this plays into the hands of radical Islamists, of people who want to paint the United States as being at war with the Muslim world, as this being between us and them?
Well, I think it helps perpetuate the us versus them mindset, and that's really dangerous for our country. I think one of the beautiful things about this country is that people come here and they integrate because our country is so welcoming, and we have a system of capitalism where people come here and they want to make lives for themselves and be a part of our society. My dad is a refugee. My mom is an immigrant. My mom is a Syrian immigrant. My dad is a Palestinian refugee. And they came here and made new lives for themselves, and now their son is in Congress. And we don't want to tell people across the world that they are not welcome here. Yes, we have to be concerned about safety. That's my #1 job here in Congress. That's the role of the federal government, to make sure that our people are safe. But at the same time, we have to make sure that we are sticking to our values, that we uphold the principle of government, the main principle of government, which is to protect people's rights and to preserve liberty. And we want people to come here and be a part of our experience.
In terms of the planning of this, were you or any of your colleagues in Congress consulted, anyone you've spoken to consulted about this executive order before it was signed? Because it seems like even members of Donald Trump's cabinet, there weren't studies being done by Homeland Security or by the Defense Department or others about how this might, play out.
Yeah, I haven't heard from anyone who has consulted. I had originally thought that some of our members, some of the chairmen of our committees were consulted, but then later I've heard just through the news and by looking at Twitter that they say they weren't consulted either. And when you have an executive order that's put out and people don't even know how it affects green card holders, that's a serious problem. That's a big portion of our population here.
I want to ask you about something Sean Spicer said today when asked about State Department employees who were circulating what's called a dissent channel memo, basically internally voicing disagreement with the executive order or raising concerns about it, career diplomats. Spicer said they should, quote, either get with the program or they can go. Should federal employees fall in line, or is there room for expressing dissent or other opinions within the government?
Well, there has to be room for dissent. And I've heard from others, my colleagues who have been asked to be part of the administration, that the president has said he wants to hear dissenting viewpoints. So I hope that that's an exception and not the rule, that Sean Spicer telling people that he's not interested in their viewpoints would be an exception if that's true.
Congressman Amash, I appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thanks, Anderson.
Did you, as Sean Spicer says, walk in and out of NSC meetings quite frequently?
No, not at all. I sat in on some principals committee meetings during the period when they were reviewing the Afghanistan policy, because the president was trying to make a weighty decision about where he wanted to go on strategy in Afghanistan. And we knew that it was going to be one that was going to bear a lot of explanation and that was going to be very important to the American people. So Robert Gibbs, our press secretary, and I sat in as observers on those sessions so we could get a sense of how the decision came about, what the process was going into it. And never did we speak in those meetings. We were purely observers. What Steve Bannon is doing is completely different. And he is going to be a principal at the table. And what is clear is he's emerging as one of the principal national security and foreign policy advisors to the president. I would never have described myself that way when I was senior advisor to the president. My portfolios were politics and communications. This really is new ground that they're charting, and using me as a kind of example or a precedent is way off the mark.
Yeah, I think I misspoke. I think I said to Pamela that you were there about bin Laden meetings. As you said, it was Afghanistan meetings. I appreciate the clarification. The other thing that Spicer was saying today is that the policy regarding the Director of National Intelligence and the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, that their attendance at some meetings will be optional, that it was the same policy under President Obama. Is he correct on that count?
Well, I got to tell you, I cannot imagine principals meetings where you don't want to hear from the Director of National Intelligence as you're making decisions about the national security of the country, or have the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff who's going to execute on orders that the Commander-in-Chief gives. It just seems illogical to me that you would want to exclude them from any meeting, or that they would not be permanent members of this group. The other thing, Pamela was, I think, charitable in describing Breitbart as a conservative-leaning news outlet. It is the voice of the alt-right movement. It is the voice, not just here, but now in Europe, of the right-wing populist, xenophobic, anti-trade, anti-immigration movement. So it is consequential that the person who helped lead that organization is now one of the, or maybe the principal foreign policy advisor and national security advisor to the President of the United States.
You obviously have a strong point of view on this, and it was visible when you came out against the ban. I just want to play for those who didn't see it. What happened? You got visibly choked up talking about the ban yesterday.
This executive order was mean-spirited and un-American.
The president has responded to what happened to you at that moment when you choked up, and here's what he said today.
I noticed Chuck Schumer yesterday with fake tears. I'm going to ask him who is his acting coach, because I know him very well. I don't see him as a crier. If he is, he's a different man. There's about a 5% chance that it was real, but I think they were fake tears.
The President of the United States says he thinks those were fake tears.
Yeah, I'm not going to dignify that kind of silliness. Let him roll up his sleeves and put out something that really does prevent terrorists rather than this. He ought to stick to the substance. Name calling and things like that are what's led to these problems that we're seeing. He doesn't take this presidency seriously enough, at least in this instance. And I have said all along, there are times he flatters me, there are times he calls names. That's not going to influence me. I'm going to do what I think is the right thing, and that's what I'm doing here, and I'm proud of it.
What's a protest without signs? Not your standard signs. We mean the more memorable ones. From "We'll trade one Trump for 10,000 refugees" to the actual welcome mat this guy brought to show support for immigrants. And it wasn't just humans displaying signs. I wag for refugees. And this dog proclaimed itself alternative cat, a play on the phrase alternative facts coined by a Trump advisor. Sure, you could sing your protest.
This land was made for you and me.
Or you could have your kid hold a sign. Keep your tiny hands off of my big future. The Kitty Brigade displayed signs that were critical. Donald Trump is very weird. And ones that were sweet. I like everyone. A list of the dumbest protest signs included "This pizza was brought by immigrants." The sign, brought by this woman, said, "There are so many dangerous policies coming from this administration, I had to buy a reusable protest sign."
Hey, hey, ho, ho, the Muslim ban has got through.
Perhaps the most personal slap at the president. Without immigration, Trump would have no wives.
I wanted to be an American.
But to be completely accurate regarding the wives count, 2/3 of Trump's wives were immigrants, proving once again we need immigrants to do jobs most Americans wouldn't do. Wrong, isn't it?
But it feels so right.
Ginny Mo, CNN, New York.
Tonight, growing concerns from both parties over the appointment of President Trump's top political advisor, Steve Bannon, to a full seat on the National Security Council. Bannon, former head of the right-leaning Breitbart News website, known as a hardline nationalist and opponent of globalism, will have a seat on the council's so-called Principals Committee. But the Director of National Intelligence and the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff will not, even though experts say their posts are critical to almost every decision the NSC makes.
The appointment of Mr. Bannon is something which is a radical departure from any National Security Council in history. It's of concern, this, quote, reorganization.
Tony Blinken, who was Deputy National Security Advisor under President Obama, says Bannon's presence on the NSC is risky.
The concern is that decisions on national security and on our foreign policy should be a politics-free zone to the greatest extent possible.
The National Security Council was created after World War II for the president to be able to handle immediate threats facing the country.
It was designed to kind of stabilize presidential policy and constrain the president a little bit so he wouldn't just talk to anybody.
Its core members were the president, vice president, secretaries of state and defense, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. Sometimes other secretaries like Treasury or Energy have been added in. The secretaries make up the Principals Committee.
Now, the National Security Council does not make decisions. The president makes the decisions. He doesn't have to follow their advice.
If President Trump's NSC was shaped like those of previous administrations, the Principals Committee would have included the Director of National Intelligence, Dan Coats, and the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Joseph Dunford. But under President Trump, the Principals Committee will not include General Dunford or DNI Coats, except when their specific expertise is called for, and will include Steve Bannon, who spent 7 years as a naval officer. White House Press Secretary Sean Spicer points out Barack Obama's political advisor David Axelrod sometimes attended NSC meetings and said President Trump would benefit from a political advisor's presence.
Having the chief strategist for the president in those meetings, who has a significant military background, to help guide what the president's final analysis is going to be, is crucial.